Welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. Hinduism is the oldest living religion in the world, and Hindu religious scriptures are among the oldest known religious texts to humans. These scriptures form the basis of every aspect of Hinduism, but interestingly, most Hindus have rarely read these Hindu scriptures and often are not even acquainted with the core scriptures of Hinduism. When you talk of Hindu scriptures, there is a generic reference to the Vedas. But beyond that, there is very little understanding of what these scriptures actually contain, even among normal Hindus themselves. There are a variety of reasons for this lack of acquaintance with one's own religious scriptures. First is, Hindu scriptures are written in Sanskrit. It is a language that is unfortunately lost to most Hindus. Second is that translation is not a solution for Hindu scriptures. Other books of other religions, the scriptures are very prose oriented, are straightforward, direct. They are either stories or they are edicts, and a translation can remain faithful to the true meaning of that religious text. But in the case of Hinduism, a lot of scriptures are poetic and contain a lot of metaphors, and a lot of esoteric subjects are dealt with. This makes it very difficult for translations to be faithful to the essence of Hindu scriptures. Additionally, Hindu scriptures are believed to have a certain vibration. These Sanskrit scriptures written in Sanskrit are supposed to have a certain divine vibration, and therefore the appeal of translations is much lesser for Hindus. The third reason why Hindus don't really have a great acquaintance with their own core scriptures is that, unlike a lot of other religions which rely on a single text, a single book as their core scripture, Hinduism has a large body of work, hundreds of books, even among its foundational scriptures. So this makes it difficult for ordinary Hindus to be able to read through all the scriptures or even get acquainted with all of these foundational scriptures. Because of all this, Hindus are at best acquainted with some sections of hymns and chants, central divine legends and stories, but rarely with the core Hindu scriptures themselves. In fact, most present day Hindus don't even have an understanding of what forms Hindu scriptures. Today we will discuss Hindu scriptures, how they are structured, and what purpose these scriptures serve in Hinduism. The central body of Hindu scriptures is known as the Vedas. Ved means knowledge in Sanskrit. Now contrast it with what other religions call their religious texts. You take any religious texts, the Bible. The Bible means the book. The Quran's Arabic translation is recitation. The Torah's Arabic translation is instruction or law. So even in the simple semantic of what each religion calls their religious text, you can see a difference in approach. For Hindu religion, the ultimate reference is not just a specific book or a recitation of things or an instruction or a law that comes from God. It is knowledge, knowledge is seen as God in Hinduism. The central body called the Vedas, they actually consist of 4 different kinds of Vedas, or 4 different Vedas. They are categorized into the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharvana Veda. Now there are further subdivisions and nuances within each of the Vedas which we will not go into today. That will probably be a much longer discussion if we start delving into what each of these Vedas contain and what they are meant for. We will do it in a different session. But for now I will just stop with saying that each Veda can be divided into 2 broad sections. One is the Karma Kanda and the other one is the Jnana Kanda. The Karma Kanda focuses on action. What actions must be performed by human beings in their spiritual journey. So this is about spiritual actions, is Karma Kanda. And the Jnana Kanda is about the knowledge of spirituality. So the Karma Kanda, which is a significant bulk of the Vedas, focuses on actions to be performed in your spiritual journey, and the Jnana Kanda is about knowledge to be gained which will further your spiritual journey. Vedas are the ultimate word and foundation in Hinduism. There are no authors for any of these Vedas, as they are supposed to have been passed from time immemorial. They are also referred to as Shruti. Shruti essentially means sound or that which is heard, essentially the same. So why do they call this the Shruti? Some scholars posit that it was called the Shruti because Vedas were passed down verbally from one generation to another. Therefore it was passed verbally, sound, and therefore it was called a Shruti. But we need to understand, why was it passed down verbally? Maybe Hindus did not have a script and therefore they had to pass this verbally. But they did have a script. There are a lot of Hindu scriptures of lesser importance that are written down and passed down from generation to generation. Then why is there a verbal pass down of this core Hindu scripture? The reason is that the Vedas are not just texts. They are not prosaic. They are hymns and songs with specific pronunciation and intonations which are critical for them. These intonations and pronunciations are of such critical value that writing them down and passing them down will not ensure faithful reproduction, and therefore it had to be verbal. Now these Vedas are often difficult to interpret, both the language and the concepts. So while the Vedas form the basis of Hinduism, they are the foundational, immemorial, eternal spiritual knowledge. You cannot understand the Vedas directly. So to help understand the Vedas, there is something called the Veda Angas. The Veda Angas, Anga essentially means in Sanskrit a organ or a constituent. So the Veda Angas essentially means the constituents of the Vedas. What is this constituents of the Vedas? There are 6 components or constituents of the Vedas. So if you need to master the Vedas, you first need to master the constituents of the Vedas. The Veda Angas are 6. The first one is Shiksha. Shiksha essentially means lesson, that's all it means in Sanskrit, but here Shiksha has a special connotation. It deals with phonetics. Given that Vedas were meant to be verbally transmitted, understanding phonetics was important even to just pronounce the Vedas correctly. Sanskrit is a very structured language. If you see the Sanskrit alphabet, you will be reminded of primary school chemistry. It will look like a periodic table. And the organization will be based on the organ of the body from which the sound will come. So, is the sound for that syllable coming from the throat? They all form one level. The ones that come when you roll your tongue is another set. So, Sanskrit is extremely organized. Sanskrit also has this concept of a sandhi, which is a joining of 2 or 3 words together based on how they occur, and they are pronounced together as a single word, right? So when you start joining words and creating new words like this, it is very important for you to understand this concept of sandhi, phonetics, how when they are joined, what kind of pronunciation needs to come out for this new word. There is also a belief that Vedic chanting results in special vibrations that are beneficial to human beings. So each syllable needs to be pronounced in a certain way. In any other language, let's say English again, for example, example is just example. I could say example, I could say example, I could say example. So any intonation, pitch, example is example. But in the Vedas, depending on the place where they occur, each syllable needs to be pronounced with a certain pitch, a certain loudness. It is almost musical. Each syllable in fact has a mudra to go with it. A mudra is a sign of the hand to go with it, to help students understand the pitch and the accent that needs to be used for that syllable in that position. So this is phonetics. This is an entire area of study which is one part of the Veda Anga. The second part of the Vedanga are the Chandas. Chandas is nothing but meter. Meter is a very common thing in all poetry. You would have come across it in poetries in any language. There will essentially be feet and meters. Why were Vedas written in meter? Why not in prose? Meter has a very huge value over here. The chandas or the meter in Sanskrit, whenever you start to talk about any set of hymns, you start off by saying that this is the meter that this hymn is going to be in. In modern software, we have something called a checksum, which is used to find out if the software transmitted is the original one or has been advertently or inadvertently corrupted. So for Vedas, the meter, the chandas, acts as the checksum, because if you omit a word in a hymn or if you replace a word in a hymn, the meter would be lost and any error can be quickly found out and fixed. So chandas is the second area of study if you want to master the Vedas. The third is the Vyakarana. Vyakarana is nothing but grammar as found in every other language. Grammar becomes all the more important for Sanskrit because Sanskrit has a huge number of homonyms. Homonyms means words that are spelled the same way, and they are also homophones. They are pronounced the same way but have different meanings. So most Sanskrit words are polymorphic depending on the context. Further, each word can be modified based on whether it is being used as a subject, an object or a verb, and it can be modified depending on whether it is about a person, whether it's about the first person, second person. So in English I would say studied is studied. So if I have to say studied, does it mean anything? Who studied? No one knows. I have to say I studied, you studied, he studied, they studied, we studied. Studied remains constant. I have to use a pronoun to be able to figure out whether to understand who studied. But in Sanskrit that's not the case. You can modify the word studied and you will know which pronoun is being referred to. So because of all this, grammar becomes so difficult. Vedas are often very concise, okay, they are almost parsimonious in some cases, and therefore you need to have a good command over grammar to understand the meaning of a word in a given context. The fourth Veda Anga is the Nirukta. Nirukta is etymology. Etymology in any language, to understand the true intent of that word, etymology is important. Vedic Sanskrit had some pretty archaic usages, and knowing the etymology of words was important to understand the intended use of that word in the Vedas. So when you talk about any word in Sanskrit, if you understand the etymology, you truly understand what it was meant for. For example, take the word mantra. Mantra, many people go ahead and start chanting mantras. But if you truly understand the etymology of the word mantra, it is mananat trayate iti mantra, which is on reflection, mananat, trayate, it protects, therefore mantra. This is how usually the etymology of Sanskrit in Nirukta is provided. It talks about something, it gives a phrase and says, therefore this word was formed. This word comes from this phrase. Mananat trayate iti mantra. Therefore, when you talk of a mantra, you know that you are not supposed to chant it. Chanting gives you nothing. Reflection, rumination on the mantra is required. So to understand this kind of nuance and detail, it is very important for us to understand etymology. The fifth Vedanga is the Kalpa. Kalpa is about ritual procedures. As I told you, there is the Karma Kanda of the Vedas, and it is about actions, spiritual actions. It involves a lot of rituals, and the procedures are explained in the Kalpa. And if you need to do any Vedic rituals, you need to know how a ritual must be performed. And the last one is Jyotisha. Jyotisha is nothing but astrology. But the purpose of Jyotisha as a Vedanga is not predicting future. In fact, we will talk about Jyotisha, astrology, Vedic astrology, Hindu astrology in more detail in a different session. It is very fascinating. But here, from a Vedic perspective, the purpose of Jyotish was to understand the time in the context of how heavenly bodies are moving around. The study of time was extremely important for Vedic Hinduism, because they believed that cosmic energies impacted earthly life and also the human body and the human mind. So knowledge of time in the context of the position of the heavenly bodies was important to know when to perform actions, and all the more important when you are talking about spiritual actions like rituals. So this is the second layer, Veda Angas. So you have the Vedas, foundational knowledge. To understand the Vedas well, you need to have mastered the Veda Angas. So without mastery of the Veda Angas, you can't really understand and appreciate the true essence of what the Vedas are communicating. Now, while this is the foundation, there is also a huge body of work that have a generic name called Smriti. Now Smriti, there the Vedas were called the Shruti, right? The other body of work that we are talking about is called the Smriti. The Smriti in Sanskrit means remembered or memory. This is probably called so because this is like remembered history or remembered happenings or remembered conventions or remembered knowledge that's passed down through ages. This was not necessarily passed down verbally, but a lot of it was written down. There is also another interpretation of why this is called Smriti. This is my interpretation based on my reading of scriptures, is that Smriti meaning memory, and memory in Hinduism is considered as a fluctuation of the mind. It's called a vritti. If you read the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Ashtanga Yoga Sutra, you will find that memory is one of the vrittis or the fluctuations of the mind, and therefore because it's a product of the human mind and it is not divine, it is therefore fallible. So smritis are probably called that because they are a product of the human mind and are not truly divine like the Vedas, which are shrutis, which need to be passed down verbally. Now, unlike the Vedas, smritis, any of these smritis have specific authors, and many of these smritis are just books of practical application. And if you were to again categorize the smritis, you could categorize it into 4 different areas. Hinduism always has 4 different areas. This keeps on repeating in Hinduism. In human life, they split every aspect of it into 4 different areas. One is the dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is it's a difficult word to translate. Loose translation, you could say that it is righteousness. You could say it is law, it is the right thing to do. Things like that fall under dharma. Artha is material wealth, material power, that is artha. And kama is desire of any sort. Okay, while kama is usually in modern world we see kama as only sexual pleasure. It is not just sexual pleasure. Kama is desire of any kind. And moksha is liberation. Okay, so these 4 aspects or these 4 categories will repeat themselves in a lot of areas in Hinduism. Within these 4 areas, the subjects covered are very wide. Under dharma, you will have things like social laws, you will have things like spiritual laws. Famous social laws include the Manusmriti, the Parasara Smriti. There are specific scientific treatises like the Rasayana Shastra. Rasayana Shastra is nothing but chemistry. The Bhautika Shastra, which is nothing but physics. So you also have economic treatises like the Arthashastra. You have architecture, which is the Vastu Shastra, and obviously the world famous Kama Sutra, which is a guidance on sex. And on the moksha side of it, you obviously have things like the Brahma Sutra, which is a commentary or a discussion on God, liberation, etc. Now, this huge work called under the common name of Smritis is of varying antiquity. Some of these are many millennia old, some of these are just maybe 700, 800 years old. The reason that these are of different antiquity is that there are practical perspectives and discoveries by different humans in different ages. Philosophies of intellectuals of different ages are in each of these shastras, these sutras. So for example, just on social law, there are probably 18 to 20 different books written in different ages, because the social law needs to change with time. So the intellectual of a certain age, the Manusmriti was written by Manu probably 3 epochs ago. Okay, I'm not talking about 3 millennia, epochs ago. And there is the Parasara Smriti, and there are so many Smritis which focus on social laws. And some of these texts are called sutras, some of these are called shastras. Okay, the Smriti text, when you take any text, they will end with the suffix sutra. Some will end with the suffix shastra. What is the difference? Not really a great difference. It is just the style of writing. A sutra essentially means a thread. The focus when you're writing a sutra for the author is to keep it as concise as possible, and and because it's going to be that concise, okay, it is going to also be, or each word is going to be very loaded and therefore esoteric. In fact, half a syllable saved is usually compared to something like a kingdom won, okay, for the author. So when you come across sutras on the dharma side, usually whenever you see any dharma sutra, it's usually focused on the religious or the spiritual rituals in the karma kanda. It's usually a decoction of that, it's usually a summary of that. While when you talk about dharma shastra, it is more about verbose, it's still in the form of a meter, but it's more verbose than a sutra, and it's about general social law. Now, apart from this, now we talked about the Vedas, the Vedangas, then the Shastras, Sutras, which form a significant bulk of the Smritis. Then there is, apart from this, there is something called the Itihasa. Itihasa. It's break it down, Iti, Ha, As. Iti is this. Ha is nothing but, in Sanskrit, this Ha comes as part of emphasis. So it is like saying surely, indeed. So iti, ha, as. As is like the English word be, was, etc. So this is essentially, it comes from the Sanskrit word asti, which is equivalent to be. So what iti, ha, as means, this indeed was, or this surely was. Why indeed? Why not this was? The reason is, this surely was is history. It is about historical figures and their life accounts, and it is surely was because it is not hearsay history. It is not written because someone passed it down. The writer needs to be a contemporary of whatever they are writing about. So you cannot write about, in Itihasa, author cannot write about something that happened 2 centuries ago, 3 centuries ago. They have to be contemporaries of those historical figures that they are writing about. So you will find that in each Itihasa, the author themselves become a character there. And at some point in time, they are not a central character, but a fringe character that interacts or has a touch and go with the central characters. And then there are the Puranas. Purana essentially means old or ancient. This you can consider in contrast to Itihasa, which is indeed was, therefore history. Puranas are like legends. Puranas are not truly history of humans. They are passed down. Hearsay includes a lot of items, and they deal a lot with gods. So a person writing a Purana is not a contemporary of the gods. Okay, need not be a contemporary of the gods or of any of the characters. To be considered a Purana, you need to have 5 attributes. That book, that text needs to deal with 5 items. It is called the Pancha Lakshana. Without the Pancha Lakshana, if these 5 attributes are not dealt with, or 5 aspects are not dealt with, it is not a Purana. What are the 5 aspects of the Puranas? The 5 aspects of the Puranas are the Sarga. Sarga essentially means the origin of the universe. How was the universe created? That is the Sarga, and that needs to be part of the Purana. And then not just the Sarga, the Prati Sarga, which is how does dissolution take place, and after that once again creation. In Hinduism there is this concept of dissolution and creation going around in cycles. So the Puranas need to address how the universe was created, how the universe is destroyed and recreated, and it also has to talk about some of the Vamsas. Vamsa is essentially genealogy. Okay, it has to talk about the genealogy of gods and god kings. This is the third attribute. This third aspect needs to be addressed in the Purana. And it also needs to describe at least one specific epoch in detail. The epoch is called the Manvantara. Okay, so it needs to talk about at least one epoch in detail. And the last 5th Lakshana, or the attribute or the aspect, is that it also needs to deal with description of royal dynasties, of at least a few royal dynasties, very key ones. It's called the Vamsanu Charitra. Okay, it is the history, the dynastic history it needs to deal with. Now there are different perspectives on the Puranas. Experts disagree, scholars disagree on a lot of things, but for this discussion at our level, you can assume that there are 18 large Puranas, key ones, which are called the Mahapuranas, and there are 18 sub Puranas, which are the Upapuranas. Now in my reading of the Puranas, I have found that the first two sections especially, okay, which is the ones leading talking about the in fact even three sections, okay, the Sarga, the origin, the creation of the universe, the dissolution, creation, recreation, and the genealogy of gods, it is often very metaphorical. It has so many metaphors, and if you don't truly reflect on the metaphor, it can be deceptively simple and sometimes appear like a childish story. To understand the metaphor, however, you need to have a lot of scholarship in Sanskrit. You need to be able to understand when you take a character, the name of a character. Let's say the name Daksha. Daksha is supposed to be one of the progenitors. Okay, you could think of Daksha as a character, someone who is begetting children. But if you actually try to start looking at the metaphor out here, Daksha means dexterous, skillful. So when you say that Daksha populated this earth, Daksha ruled over this earth, it is essentially a metaphor to say that skill ruled over this earth, skill populated this earth. So this kind of metaphor is very important for us to understand what this Purana is trying to tell us, rather than read it like a story, taking everything literally. Now this itself, whatever we've discussed, a high level summary of the scriptures, as you can see, is a huge collection of literature. If one were to take up its study and say, I'm going to read all of this, it's probably going to take multiple lifetimes to just even study all of this. So what should we read? Now you have understood the structure of this Hindu scriptures, but if you are interested in saying, hey, you know what, there's so much of scriptures, we have talked about so much, we talked about Vedas, the Vedangas, we have talked about Smritis, within that the Shastras, the Sutras, we have talked about Itihasas, Puranas. Folks, this is not going to be possible for all of us to read all of it. What should I be focusing on? Then it depends on what your intent is. Let me summarize these scriptures again, along with talking about the purpose and the intent for which they can be used. So Vedas are the foundation, focusing on spirituality and the path to the truth through action and through knowledge. So the Karma Kanda is the action chapter of the Vedas. So if you want to, for most people, most of us who are like lay people, who are not extremely mature in the outlook of the world, to improve and have a spiritual journey that moves us towards intellectual maturity, the Karma Kandas are very good. You don't need to study the Karma Kandas unless you plan to conduct the rituals all by yourself. Okay, you can obviously take the help of people who are experts in Karma Kandas. These rituals, if done correctly, they are meant for slowly cleansing the mind and bringing the mind under control, while at the same time seeking to appease and align with nature so that you can get material benefices. So the Karma Kanda focuses on moving you slowly to a mature mindset and getting you material benefits. So that's the focus of Karma Kanda, and even if you want material benefits, you don't need to study the Karma Kanda. That's a huge amount of work unless you intend to take up a profession conducting rituals. The Jnana Kanda is for people who have already achieved a certain mental maturity, and the focus is not material benefits. You're not thinking about, hey, I need a better job, I need more wealth, or I need a great family, but you're trying to understand the ultimate truth. Then the Jnana Kandas of the Vedas is something that you can start reading through. It's going to be extremely esoteric, and it's going to be extremely difficult, I understand, it's an understatement, to be able to internalize, but that is the purpose of the Jnana Kanda, to be able to progress towards the ultimate knowledge and not focus on material benefits. Now the Shastras, okay, these are very worldly books of material knowledge, and they deal with various subjects as we have seen. You can study these if you are interested in the corresponding subject. If you are interested in law, read the Dharma Shastra. If in economics, read the Artha Shastra, chemistry, Rasayana Shastra, and so on and so forth. But do remember that these are all many of these are millennia old, and the context you need to, when you're reading through them, you have to understand that the context is millennia old, and some of it might not make sense to you in the present day, but a lot of it will probably make sense to you in the present day. Things like the way that they approached physics, the way they approached astronomy, all of this still would make sense, but social laws will probably, you will be questioning some of them as to why, unless you understand the context of 3 millennia before what was a society, we might not be able to appreciate it. The Itihasas and the Puranas, as we have discussed, this is the history and legend, is meant for mass consumption. This is meant for all of us. This is meant for every lay person. But they have a special place in Hinduism just beyond being stories. It's not just bedtime stories, it's not just stories that are told in a pastime. They have a special place. In the modern world, if you go to the top colleges, if you go to Harvard, if you go to any of these top colleges, they have something called the case study method for learning, which means they first teach a little bit about the principles of management. Let's say you're going to a B school, you go to Harvard B school. They don't just teach about the basic principles of management, but they also present a business situation and allow students to debate and discuss the principles that need to be applied to that situation. In many cases, these are real life situations. Now, taking the principles and just reading the principles will not give the students a true understanding of how the application of these principles must happen. Through the case study method, by talking about a true business situation, and you allow students to debate, discuss the principles that were applied in that situation by the central characters, you can understand how principles must be applied. This gains a practical understanding of tricky, real life, overlapping issues that result in gray areas rather than just a pedantic, theoretical, black-white view. The Itihasas and Puranas are the case studies for Hindu philosophy. Everything that's written in the Vedas, everything that is written in the Dharma Shastras and the other Shastras for conduct, you can use the Itihasas and Puranas as case study to understand, discuss the actions and intents of the different characters, and it will help us understand the right way to apply Hindu philosophy in practical life. Now, this was a much longer session than our usual sessions. Hope this has given you a good understanding of the layout of Hindu scriptures and the purpose of Hindu scriptures. Even if you do not have the time or the inclination to read through these Hindu scriptures, let us all, practicing Hindus at least, know what exists in our Hindu scriptures, what is the value that it provides, and probably at some point in time you can graduate from taking on the Itihasas, Puranas, and slowly graduate to the foundational aspects of it over time. Thank you. Thanks for joining me today. See you again soon.